You're listening to Were You Still Talking?
They pump out your blood and they pump in a new batch of blood, and all of it is the blood of children.
All the big stars are going to be on TV now. I mean, it's just the way it's going. Your role, I think, will be played by Brad Pitt.
What'd you wear?
I wore my loincloth wrapped around my feet.
Are you going by John today?
And that's absolutely true. You feel it in every cell in your body.
Yeah, you can bend the truth and bend the visualizations no matter what your political affiliation.
You could have an alpaca. A girlfriend's daughter recently got married and they had llamas or alpacas at the wedding.
A recording room. They recorded a couple songs in the kitchen of Rumbo.
So, wait, you microdosed before this, right?
What? Hey, welcome back. This is Joel Albrecht, and you are listening to Were You Still Talking? Today on the podcast, I have a very special guest, and I'm going to do a different kind of introduction because normally I try and introduce the person going by their resume or whatever, and I kind of mess it up. But my guest today knows himself much better than I do and has a more traditional way to introduce. And so I'm going to just turn it over to him. Welcome to the podcast, Andrew.
Thank you. And it's interesting to sit in this space and have that little kind of how do we navigate this? Doing podcasts, I've been on a few, and it seems to be very common for people to go through, hey, this guy wants to introduce himself in a certain specific way. So I'll introduce myself in the traditional language as best as I can, and then also in the contemporary. So dogate, Andrew Ecker yinishe, donna e nishinigi e inde nishe, Irish bashachin, inde dashache, German dashanali, kote go e tashli e Portland, Oregon inasha, shama e Kathy Lindsey wolye, shiza e Dale Ecker wole. So I am Andrew Ecker, my mother, Kathy Lindsey, my father, Dale Ecker, my mother's mother, Elva Gallegos, Apache woman from New Mexico, my father's mother, Evelyn Beatty, Irish woman from Pennsylvania, my mother's father, Leroy Lindsey, Apache man from Arkansas, and my father's father, Wayne Ecker, German Algonquin from Pennsylvania. I have a daughter, Bailey, a son, Peyton, beautiful, beloved fiance, Monica. I was incarnated into this body in the land of the Multnomah, under beautiful Mount Hood next to the Willamette River in Portland, Oregon, although I reside here in the land of the Akmal Atam, the Peepash, the Maricopa Inde people, in Phoenix, Arizona, the vast valley of the sun. And I'm grateful to be here with you, Joel, and unpack this conversation that we had, one of those conversations that you wish you hit the record button on, because it was just such a great experience connecting with you and learning more about your podcast and also some about your life. And we have so much in common with music, and yeah, it's just great to connect.
Yeah, that's. I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to mention that. I never do pre-interviews based on some other far more famous podcasters. And now I see what they mean because we had such a great conversation. And I was just like, yeah, this is why I don't do pre-interviews but it is it's another good conversation today. I think it's really incredible that we were born under the same mountain. I was literally born in Hood River Hospital, the part of it that's not really used anymore, but right under the mountain. I lived in Parkdale at the time, so it's pretty cool to find out we're from we were incarnated here in basically the same place.
Yeah, and there's something to that. The idea, as far back as we can remember, right? We got Jesus of Nazareth, that whole statement of self-identity or identity being a part of the place that you were born or the place that you're from. And yet in the contemporary culture, it's usually, hi, my name is Andrew. I'm an author. I'm a keynote speaker. I'm a coach, all of these ideas. And it feels so, I guess, humbling to remind myself of that I'm a child of people, and I'm also a child of this planet. And that connection to the Northwest is definitely something that means something to me. My family was New Mexico transplants to Portland. And Portland's been such a beautiful place for me. I wasn't born directly at the base of Mount Hood, but I definitely remember, looking out and seeing both Mount Hood and Mount St. Helens. And of course, I think both of us are old enough to say we were there when the mountain blew up and what that was like. I don't know if you remember the snowfall of ashes that came down, and that was such an experience, such a beautiful thing to witness in a certain sense, but yet such a devastating experience as well. But how many people get to say that they were, they had ash rain down on them from one of the largest mountains in the Pacific Northwest? That's pretty cool.
That's really, that was an experience. And I thought it was incredible at the time. I remember thinking how amazing it was. But then I walked out and went, oh no, there's ash on my car. But like that really matters. It didn't matter. It wasn't until years later that I found out how devastating it was. It was actually not till about 10 years ago, National Geographic did a story on it, and I think they did a newer video on it. I had no idea how much of the mountain it took, how quickly that happened. It was one of the most destructive volcano eruptions in the U.S. in recorded history that we know of. It was amazing, amazing. That was some power. And one of my favorite places, the Hawaii Islands. I like to go to the Big Island where the volcano is kind of the goddess of the island, and that's So I'm really connect to volcanoes somehow.
Yeah, they say that in the Maori tradition that idea of your mountain and your river, this is something synonymous with the way that you introduce yourself. The Maori people of New Zealand. And I think about how in many Native American cultures that the idea of where you're from was associated with your clan and even sometimes the food you ate, your ancestors ate. This is what created clan identity. And we've gone so far, we've distanced ourselves from these ideas, these simplistic, pragmatic approaches to fortifying the space of self-identity. So our children are left with this question of, what are you going to be when you grow up?
Right.
And,
right.
And that void, right, that perpetuates so many of our behaviors. Some of us drive ourselves into, getting a doctorate or getting a master's degree or whatever it may be to fill that inside of us. Others go into sports and music and artistic kinds of endeavors. And yet we really, struggle to answer that simple question that so many indigenous communities around the world answer from the very, first part of raising a child. It's to give them that space to introduce themselves as a grandchild, as a child, as a person from the earth, as an earthling. And that's been my message, to take that concept and hopefully, bridge the kind of the gap in, I feel, this contemporary culture, because I didn't really grow up with any of this knowledge. I had to come into it at a later age. And for me, it's been so transformative and has given me such a place of peace in my life. And the hope is that one day I'm sitting around the campfire in places that my family calls sacred. And I get to hear my granddaughter or my grandson introduce themselves as me, and reestablishing that idea and celebration of interconnectedness in our family. It just is a vision to hold, a value, and really a level of abundance for my family. My grandmother, she never witnessed that. My mom never witnessed that in me. I wasn't able to introduce myself as my grandmother around the sacred fire. She didn't have that privilege. My family goes back to the Madera River Valley of Texas, the Madera Valley there, and Fort Davis, this area. This is a fort, like so many forts around the United States, specifically in the West, that we drive by these forts and we think, great, there's a there's a historical place, it's even on the map, as you're driving down the whatever, this historical landmark, whatever the name may be. And we've gone so far as to disassociate ourselves from the reason why those forts were built. Those forts were built to subdue people, to kill people. They were used in the American Indian War, which is the longest lasting war in American history, regardless of what, NBC, CBS, ABC say when they tell you that Afghanistan is the longest lasting American war. This narrative in our contemporary culture, we really have. I try to absence myself from the we statement. This is what government, has yet to do, is to really acknowledge a lot of what has gone on in our native people. Myself, right? I've seen in my short life, maybe I shouldn't say short. I'm 45 now, but I've seen, LGBTQ people. Short. I've seen LGBTQ, people be seen by the United States government. They're now recognized.
It's such a nutty concept. My wife and they kept harping on this new story about how many people this latest disease killed, and I don't want to underplay the tragedy in any way, but they were comparing it to World War I, World War II, and the Vietnam War. How many people were killed? And we thought the information was wrong. We're like, wait a minute, more people died in World War II than this. So we went and looked at the numbers, and she ended up on the site for. Now I forgot who it is, but it's basically the military site to say how many soldiers were killed in each war. And it goes all the way back to the Revolutionary War. How many soldiers were killed in battle. So for the Indian Wars, they call it, it was a little over 1,000 soldiers. They totally first of all, they counted a war. They call it a war, not a genocide. And of course, they only account for the soldiers that were enlisted in the American Army. Those are the only people that counted, not the millions of people that were wiped out on both sides, civilian people, but mainly on the Native American side. Not counted at all. And as far as I know, those are also Americans. It's mind-boggling how history is presented. That's kind of what I was getting at. That our tradition of presenting history it's bizarre.
It is extremely bizarre, and it definitely goes to, I guess the winner writes the discord, right? That's right. What people say. Whoever wins the war writes the history. Whoever's the enemy becomes the terrorist. Whoever is the victor becomes, the liberated general. And I feel like we have a moment here in history where we can begin to unpack some conversation. It seems like we're having a lot of transformation go on. I mean, Deb Haaland is regardless of where you're at in the political world, that is a huge transformation that we've witnessed. This is the nominee for the Interior Secretary.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. The Interior Secretary, right, has been the actual place in government that was responsible for the kill the Indian, save the man, which was a policy of the United States government. So for Deb Haaland, who is a Native American woman, to hold that office, many of our people have just shed tears over this. This is like prophecy. This is like something to celebrate. And I feel that all people can be invited to celebrate in that we come to this place of reckoning in a certain step forward. I hope for a day when I can be out in the forest and can look at a sign that, the idea was and were is absent. I go to Umpqua, quite often, and there's a sign that is right by one of the waterfalls. And for those of you that don't know, Umpqua is this beautiful national forest in Central Oregon. Just amazing, waterfall after waterfall, and rivers and creeks, and gorgeous place. Well, there's a sign there in one of these very beautiful sites, and it says Voices of the Past. And it goes into saying the Athabascan language was spoke here. So I have a video on my YouTube channel of me sharing my ceremonial introduction to the sign,
that's great.
In this point of defiance, right? To say that, I'm still here, we are still here. Like, why is this this kind of penciling genocide, and what happens to children, and what happens to, even myself? It's like just the lack of acknowledgement. These are simple little things that can be corrected in, the way we look at Indigenous people, and they're all over the United States. It's instead of articulating the idea that this is an ancestral place, there are ancestral people that are now doctors and lawyers and professional athletes and musicians and artists and authors and, all of the contribution that Indigenous people have given to this country. It's like, this is the ancestral land of all these great people, and use it as an opportunity to educate. Instead, there's this Neanderthal looking depiction of kind of a stick figure man that no native drew, because they do tip shading. We know how to do depth artwork, and it's like it's got the typical breech on, and it's like it looks like one of the series in the Darwin thing, the ape to man, and it's really. I mean, I laugh, but there's also part of me that wants to cry.
Right. Yeah, it's such a strange world in that, because Americans want to teach a lot of people want to teach everyone to be American, which isn't really a real thing. And if you're American, then you can hate on all these other groups. You can decide that all these other groups are non-American, which is ridiculous, because there's no such thing as an American. But there's been a rise in violence against Asians because of what happened the previous 4 years, and calling something the Asian flu and all this stuff. And they attack Asians as if they're from the same place. The half of the world is Asian population. It just is nuts. And, it almost makes me feel like, well, maybe as people had a real understanding of their background, a real understanding of their family, they would feel like they had more of a place in the world, and wouldn't have to be looking for it in sports shirts and things like that.
Yeah, I feel that so much. And, getting back to this idea of self-identity and, the acknowledgement of who we are as people, as children, as grandchildren, there's something that's so powerful in sitting in that space. And regardless of the way a person looks, regardless of what vehicle their body is in, they have a connection to this earth. They're earthlings. Only really when Mother Earth know if you're indigenous.
Right.
That's the way. That's the way that I look at it, because you are connected genetically to this planet. There's no other starship that we know of that's going to go through the universe the way that this starship does. And we might spend billions of dollars trying to create one, but have one right here that's traveling through, distant galaxies. And it's just beautiful to reconnect to that idea and fortify the space of that. And in that, right, we give an inheritance of abundance and the natural journey of life to our children, to be able to teach them this idea of self-identity. And where did we go wrong with this? Like, when did we start believing these other forms of self? And I think for me, right, if we look at the idea of when the smith and the person came in, when the knight came in, when the farmer, the sower, all these identities that were synonymous with work and synonymous with behavior. And this became a practical idea of self. So, potentially this was during the time of the landlords, the original landlords. These were the people in Europe that they were the only ones that could have a right to self-identity associated with space or a region of Europe. I have a friend named Didlake, and he can actually take you to a place in Europe that's where Didlake is, where there's an actual lake. And this is where his ancestors originated from. But they were landlords. They owned land in Europe. So they were able to have that idea of self-identity being synonymous with the earth. The other people that were a part of that region, that were under that landlord's ownership in a certain sense, they were given names that were synonymous with their work. And that's why you have the Smith and the Parson and the Knight and all these different ideas of self-identity that were handed down over and over again to generations until that became our value, right? That became like who we are. So the conversation and the invite is to be yourself as, connected to the, and what does that mean to be in relationship to this beautiful planet? To remind yourself of the air, the water, the fire, the earth, to have a empathy for the beauty of this planet as it is, without the idea of the value of the mountain being the resort, the value of the mountain being the hotel that's built on the mountain. To look at the mountain and to see just in its innate space, just in the beauty that it is. When that happens, then we begin to understand each other in a different way. We begin to see each other as valuable. We begin to see that beauty, all living beings. This is the power of this idea of all my relations. That I am related to the tree, I am related to the mountain, I'm related to, the eagle, the bird, the dolphin. And it's just the way that the basic elements of life are arranged that make us different. It's just the way that the air, the fire, and the earth are arranged. It's the arrangement that makes us different, but we're all from the same source. We all have Holy Spirit inside of us that gives us the ability to connect to creation, to creator, to the universe, to consciousness. Jesus, I really, I was a pastor for 3 years. I kind of came at play realizing that community really, I had done what I needed to do in the community. And I was going through a divorce and I was feeling the separation in the church and all these different things. And that was really when I started going back into learning more about my ancestral connection to spirituality. Now, it wasn't until years later that I actually got to go and in ceremony. We have an idea like Native American spirituality, which is a very broad term. And then we have individual tribal ceremonies. And these tribal ceremonies are very specific and very, strict in a certain sense. There's guidelines, there's principles, there's programs in place. And for those of us that have grown up with an identity or a story in our family of being Native American, it's very challenging to kind of jump right into the deep waters of that experience without kind of getting our feet wet in something that's a little bit more pain. So maybe we're going, oh, wow. So we start going to Sweat Lodge and we start really learning the customs of the broader sense of what it means to be Native American. And that was my journey. And it was the drum that actually brought me to that first feeling comfortable in the idea of what it meant to be Native. My family, because of our ties to Texas and specifically to the Apaches of Texas, it's a very challenging space to be. In fact, grandmother, on her birth certificate, her parents were labeled as Mexican. And it also said, it says born in Balmer, Texas, but they were called Mexican. And if you look at the history, and this is in, the 1800s when this happened, late 1800s, when you look at, what was going on, right? There's this hermeneutics where we, not only the individual, but also the context of what the individual was going through. So you have the terrain, this putative group of basically assassins that were running people off land, that were killing indigenous and trying to get their land. I mean, this is blatant. The Texas Rangers were responsible in some ways for the occupation of the Comanches. Really held Texas and a lot of plains for a lot of years. And that goes back, historically to a lot of the relationship in the French and the Spanish and also the English. I mean, right in Texas, right? You have in that region, there's Louisiana, is colonized by the French. So you have the French reaching out to arm natives, and they were giving goods and services and weapons to indigenous groups. And because of that relationship, you have the ability to kind of stand in opposition to the Spanish. And the Spanish really struggled to keep Texas. And then when the Mexicans struggled to keep Texas so badly that they said to the United States, hey, come to Texas and we'll give you free land. Well, this is also during the Civil War, right? This is at the end of the Civil War. Who went to Texas? All, the Confederates. And that was what was really what birthed the Texas Rangers. I mean, these were hardened warriors that had been in war, that had seen the ravages of the Civil War. And now their new enemy was the people of Texas. So when my grandmother was putting, the name Mexican on her birth certificate, she put that name on the way of surviving. And it was, we're Apache. We're Apache, but we're show ourselves as this group of people that hopefully is going to be targeted as much, because obviously we can't pass for being white, but we can assimilate into the process of being Mexican and hopefully survive genocide of the indigenous people of that region. Some of the people were brought into the concentration camps, the war camps in Oklahoma, and also in Mexico, some of the Apache people. And us, many our ancestors stayed in Texas and kind of came a idea of being Mexican. And then so this word Mexican is the root of Spain, which is mestizo. And the way that the land grants were given to people is you could be mixed, which mestizo means mixed. It's a way of identifying a person by colonial race. Another form of, well, they're close in being Spanish that we can tax them and they'll know our ways enough. Spanish gave land grants to people who were mestizo. That was the idea that my grandma put that identity down on, the birth certificate. So these are the things we have in this to unpack. We've seen DACA, we've seen LGBTQ, we've seen gay marriage become legal. We've seen, all of these different things going on in the American community, the tearing down of statues. We've seen so much information in our lifetime. And for me, right, these are great things that are happening. We're finally coming to a place where we're recognizing these groups of marginalized people. There still is work to be done, of course. And right, there's an opportunity here to acknowledge a large group of people in the United States that have never been acknowledged. And these are the indigenous people of North America from Spanish-speaking ancestry, like me. We come from Spanish-speaking Native Americans that were colonized by Spain before they were colonized by the United States, before they were colonized by Texas, before they were colonized by Mexico. And we have never changed. The countries have. Right. The occupation has changed. Yeah, but we have never changed. And that's the thing that I feel is challenging, for many people to understand. It's like when we look at people that speak these other colonial languages, we have this tendency of saying that, oh, well, this is, this land is our land and it's not yours. And we'll build a wall here and we'll literally try to stop the natural flow of life. The natural flow of life is if people are hungry, they're going to go to where the food is. You know, if they feel threatened, they're going to go to where there's not war. They're going to go to where there is not people hurting them and their children. What would you do for your kid? You know, what would I do for my child?
No, I love that idea that people really seem to miss that, the natural flow of life. That's all we're seeing. Immigration laws are really, they're complicated. They're very complicated. I wouldn't want to be the one to try to have to figure it out. Open borders should be possible, I think, because I've always, the border's imaginary anyway. The border is an imaginary line that came about through war. It's not a real line. It's just like the borders of Oklahoma and Texas. That I just learned that little piece of Oklahoma at the very top from Texas is the part that they wanted to keep slavery in. So that's why there's this little line at the very top of Texas that's Oklahoma, because Oklahoma wanted to keep slavery and Texas was not going to do it. So that little area had slaves they wanted to keep. It's just, these lines are, they're absolutely nuts. It's like trying to stop people from going from different states to different states. It makes sense if there's a national emergency where a virus is killing people, but it doesn't, which we're not there yet. I mean, what's happened in the last year from so many experts is known as a very dire warning, but not the real thing. Like this has been bad, but it could be worse. So those kind of things, these kind of national emergencies, it makes sense. But to close down the border because you think basically it's about a race of people. That's all it's about, right? It's about a race of people that you, for some reason, don't want in your country until you realize they need to pick more lettuce. Because
and there's if you look at it,
they quickly made exception. The farmers could hire them.
Yeah, or build railroads.
Well, you go back a little ways, right? Build a railroad. If you're going to do something that is going to put money in the pockets of the land barons, as it were, because the land barons were the only people that could vote in this country for something like 100 years. From 1770s until the late 1800s, we wouldn't have been able to vote. You did have to own land for a long time. Then you had to be a white male. That if you don't have to own land, but you have to be a white male, right? And then, I think, honestly, I don't have my facts perfect, but I think the Native Americans were last to get the right to vote.
Oh yeah, that's well known.
Yeah, that's what I thought. They were the last. Yeah. They were the most, the most abused and tortured people in the country, but they were the last to be able to have a say in what happens here.
Yeah, and even to be looked at as human, it's been really a challenging experience with the relationship that the United States government has, and also the people of the United States. There are people in this country that believe that Native Americans are a thing of the past. I have ran into people like this, or they believe that we're all supposed to be living in teepees and have breechcloth and feathers in our hair. This idea of like what the contemporary experience of being Native American is extremely diverse. One person's experience of being Native American can be completely different than another person's. And the way that the United States government has relationship with Native Americans, the federally recognized tribes in this country, they have created this idea of blood quantum. And what this does is this creates conversations around full blood. And really, how does this come into like our language that we can talk about people, humans, right? These are humans, these are children, as the same way that you would talk about cattle or dogs, that this is a pure breed human being, right? This is an illusion. This is a confusion. This is basically the extension of eugenics and white supremacy. Right. This is the exact ordinances that have been created as the assumption of purity of race, but they were forced upon a group of indigenous people to come up with an idea of a concept of tribe and community on paper that really inevitably is set up to eliminate natives, because eventually with just the process of people falling in love and having relatives that are, not native, you're going to have the basically the loss of the bloodline. And this has happened all over in Native American communities. And I feel that we've never really, as a community ourselves, unpacked that conversation. We really haven't looked at it as, hey, these were tactics that were set up in the very foundation of white supremacy. So whenever I hear a person that talks about their full-blooded blah, 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 I need to bring that forward to them. I need to ask them, how did this become a part of your conversation? And then, right, for other indigenous people around the world, your conversation of being indigenous, that's between, like I said before, you and Mother Earth. Those are the only two that know if you're indigenous. Because for me, right, being indigenous is a relationship with the planet. That's the most important premise that we can have. And that is something personal to you. And it's also the value that you see in the world around you, your value system. And getting back to that relational value is so important and so relevant today. It's such a huge conversation to have. And I'm grateful, Joel, to be here to talk about it, because it means something to me to be recognized in your show, to be seen here. And this is like that one step in the direction of hopefully one day we're driving down the interstate and we come into Portland, and it doesn't just say welcome to Portland, but it says welcome to Portland, the ancestral land of the Multnomah and the Willamette and the Clackamas. What would that be like to live in a world that was a part of the reality? What would it be like if every PTA meeting and every single school around the United States began with an acknowledgement of the ancestral lands that those schools were built on? I mean, everywhere you go, it's not that reservation is Native American land. There's an ancestral connection to every part of this country. Where your home is at, there may have been an umbilical cord buried on that land. This is a reality of the world we live in. And we're the ones that are conscious of that. I remember being in Sweat on White Mountain in the Apache Nation and White Mountain Apache up here in Arizona, and sitting there in Sweat Lodge, and the guys who were there, the men that were there, they were introducing themselves traditionally. And this one man, he looked over at me and he said, yeah, I can tell you where my umbilical cord is buried. I can take you, right up the street from here, and I can show you the tree where it's buried at. Because you know why? Because his father took him there. His mother took him there. Mm-hmm. And they said, son, from the very moment you were born, we took care of you. We buried your umbilical cord here. These are the ways of thinking that are give us the foundation and the fortification of self-identity, emotional intelligence, and relational spirituality. How beautiful it would be if families today took that kind of responsibility to their children. I mean, we talk about being environmentalists and trying to do what we can, recycling and, trying to buy fuel efficient cars and, the things that we do as conscious people. But yet, are we really living in relationship with the planet? Have we given ourselves that permission slip to not just, do the behaviors, but actually allow for the planet to be a part of our consciousness, to be a part of us on a spiritual level? And these are the things that indigenous communities have known since the dawn of cultural identity. They've understood that people are the epitome of the planet, and that relationship is symbiotic. We're in a we're not the virus. We're not the problem of the devastation. It's our values that are the problem. We originally were the people that cultivated the forest and kept the fires out. We were the ones that burnt the earth underneath the large trees so that the forest could thrive. But now we've gotten so far away from that. We don't even understand how to be in relationship again. But thankfully, there's communities that have held on to these principles. And the beautiful thing is that there's a remnant inside of all of us, because these concepts are woven into the fabric of our DNA. These are things that when we remind ourselves of the sun against our skin, of the water against our face, we can activate those principles of empathy. Because really, having empathy for the planet and having empathy for your brothers and sisters are the same. This is neuroplasticity right here that takes so many years to dumb down. I mean, basically the system has to beat that out of you. or numb it out of you, or, cocaine it out of you, or alcohol it out of you. I mean, how many people that are living in the professional world right now are going to sleep every night, drinking a half a bottle of your favorite, expensive whatever, and going through the day on some kind of anxiety, antidepressant, pharmaceutical medicine.
Right. And apparently a lot more in the last 9-10 months. Quite a few more people are doing that. And it's, I love the concepts you're talking about as being in touch with the Earth Mother. And there's so many ways. Just walking out the door and letting the sun hit your face is part of that. I got a tree in my backyard that I can go literally hug. Yeah, they are tree huggers in Oregon, ladies and gentlemen. And you can.
I love it.
It's a real thing. Trees have an amazing, amazing energy if you hug them. I've hugged trees that some of the oldest trees in the world are right down the road from us in the redwoods. And if you go into a grove of redwoods, you can hear them, it's not very far off the highway. You walk into a grove of redwoods, you can hear them talking to each other. And it's an incredible experience. You can also take your shoes off and walk in your backyard for a minute, and you will feel the earth. You can feel it, the energy of the earth coursing around and going up through your body. So that is such an important thing. And I mean, I don't know if it's important. It's cocaine and alcohol, but it's an important. It's
right. And using this practice of the Sacred Seven that I wrote in my book, the concept of introducing yourself to the mountain, introducing yourself, your ancestors, to the river. This is so empowering, and people have wrote me emails and they've sent me letters and cards, and they said, Andrew, the first time I introduced myself with the principles of your book, I felt the earth shake. I seen a deer come out of nowhere. This woman was in California on the coast, and there was an earthquake right after she introduced herself. Another man talked about the elk, the deer, all these different representations of the planet, saying, oh, welcome back home, welcome back, Earthling. We've missed you. And that's something to get excited about and to actually strive towards helping ourselves awaken that process. I've been on the path of being involved in working in hospitals and all of these different types of environments, bringing the drum and bringing this message of self-identity into these places, drug rehabs. And, there is a part of me that feels like, there's this warrior kind of spirit in me that wants to be out and be the activist and being screaming at people and being angry and all of these things. And I feel that ultimately, right, it comes back to this place of how can we, help a person that just doesn't know what it's really like to feel the sun? They really don't know what it's like to hug a tree. When we look at the redwoods and we see the beauty that we see, that is because we have given ourselves that permission slip. And when we think back to the person that looked at those redwoods and all they felt was dollar signs.
Hey, what can I build?
Man.
Right?
No?
I look at that today. There's something like 2 or 3% left. And it boggles my mind. And that started in the East Coast. We were lucky because in the West Coast, they were nearly done taking all the lumber in the world. But 3% of these trees are left alive, and they're 1,000-year-old, at least. That's what we know about them. Some of them, of course, are a few years old, but 1,000-year-old trees that they nearly took all of to build cabins and furniture for your backyard, and all kinds of. A lot of what they built was beautiful, but it's gone now. The trees still remain.
A lot of San Francisco was built, and a lot of that burnt up.
Right.
So that's the thing, is that one of the most devastating fires in history, was in San Francisco. And what we failed to do is we failed to see the relationship. For some reason, we think that, that just happened. It's like, it's not coincidental. There is a repercussion for every action, has a reaction. This is the way of life. And in the indigenous teachings, it's like, hey, put something back where you took, put some tobacco down for what you took, put your hair down for what you took, make an offering for whatever it is that you took from the land, because you are land. And if you take 10, you're going to become imbalanced. And do you want that imbalance to follow your children? Do you want it to follow the next 7 generations? Because you are that representation of the next 7 generations. And this becomes like this, challenging kind of conversation in our contemporary world, because there's so many levels of distortion. But yet in our practice, right, being conscious of that and doing what we can, and also loving ourselves. What is loving yourself? It's giving yourself the permission to say, I'm doing my best. And at times we can go, literally, you can go bonkers trying to do what you can for each other and for the planet, and forget about who you are. So there's a balance in that. But knowing that you have the mindfulness and the value system to look at the tree and to see innate value, to look at the mountain and see innate value, to look at people regardless of their finances or their education and see value. This is a good starting point. This is a place where you can begin to, really challenge the behaviors inside of yourself. So, it's been a road to get me to the place that I'm at right now. And, I'd like to share a little bit about how I got here, because I feel that I really didn't give that justice at the beginning. And when I mean justice, I mean like actually unpacking some of the trauma that my family experienced during the Reagan administration and even into the Clinton administration. So my parents died of drug-related causes, and my mom from a cocaine overdose and my father from cirrhosis of the liver caused by hepatitis C. So as a little boy, I was out shoplifting with my mom to support her cocaine habit. And then by the time I was a teenager, I was in the spoon, which means I was using heroin with my father. And in that life, right, I was left at the park while my mom went and copped dope when she went and bought drugs, left at drug houses, dealt with sexual abuse, watched my mom get beat up by the police in front of me, have a relationship to childhood post-traumatic stress that has been a part of my adult life as well. And that era that I lived through was an era that we can look back at now and we can say, hey, there's opportunity to correct our behavior today. And one of the programs that the United States government was doing was a program called DARE. And this was drug abuse resistance and education. And we say now, like, what the heck was going on in this? Like, why did this happen? This was armed police officers going into schools and telling children, to stay off drugs. And also, when I was a kid, they were going in and interrogating children and getting them to turn in their brothers and sisters and their moms and dads for smoking marijuana. So when they came into my neighborhood in Southeast Portland, which those of you that are old enough to remember Southeast Portland, it looked like a bunch of VW buses and Harley Davidsons broke down and they made a tree house when I was a kid.
It was not like it is today.
No, not at all.
Not
at all. I mean, my grandparents, came from New Mexico, and I think they paid $10,000 for their house. That's probably, the homes there are complete, like crazy $1 million homes in Southeast Portland.
Right.
It's just
insane.
It's insane, right? This was right after the Vietnam War, and there was Vietnam veterans all on Hawthorne burning stuff to stay warm, literally. All those, hipster shops and pubs and everything, none of that was there. All there was the Freddy's.
That's right.
Right?
That was there.
The Freddy's. Yeah. And, oh gosh, I can't, what is his name? The furniture guy. Oh man, I wish I could remember that. Boy, I've lost my Portland, not knowing his name. But I can tell you, Rod, oh man. Rod the River, was that the Saturday morning? Anyway, yeah, there was the Fred Meyer.
The Saturday morning guy that walked up with his boat. Ramblin' Rod.
Ramblin' Rod with the tugboat. Yeah,
Ramblin' Rod.
Okay, so you got Ramblin' Rod, but what was the furniture guy?
I can't remember because I was down here in Eugene where eggs are cheaper in the country and so are cars and trucks. That's all I remember, and the ad is still on. Been on since I was a kid.
That's hilarious, man. That is hilarious. So I'm sitting in, Sunnyside Elementary School, and I'm just sweating bullets because my mom tells me if the police ask you if we're smoking pot and you tell them we are, you're going to break up our family. And, this
Scary
is
stuff.
this is
kid.
Oh yeah, exactly. This is a part of our culture, literally, like some of the earliest memories I remember were cleaning the seeds and the stems back in, when seeds and stems were in marijuana.
When there was, yeah, exactly. None of that now.
None of that. And, so that was my job as a kid, to clean the pot. And, in fact, one of my family, photo albums, there's a big pot leaf right in the family photo album next to my baby pictures. And that was just a part of the way that we lived. And, when they came in and, my heart's beating, my heart's pounding, and fortunately I wasn't interrogated, but they said something to me. The listeners are probably wondering, why is this guy so about self-identity? Well, the DARE cops told me as a kid, if you have one drug addict parent, you're 50% more likely to become a drug addict. And that was like that moment in my life where I felt like for the first time, somebody had told me that I was genetically flawed. And I didn't really even know what it meant, but I felt it. I felt like this idea of this responsibility to this identity that subsequently led me down that path of behaviors. And, years later, I was sitting in the same prison that I had visited my dead father at. Wow. And I was contemplating, spirituality and asking myself the questions of, how did I get here? Why? Blaming my mom, blaming my dad. My dad, he dealt with heroin addiction pretty much his entire life. I mean, I think he told me he was like 14 when he first started getting high. Had a gang name, in our little Vadio neighborhood in Phoenix, because I grew up brown in a white neighborhood in Portland, Oregon, and then white in a brown neighborhood in Peoria. Yeah, exactly. So it was like totally different. Like for me, right? Like the idea of a person saying, well, skin color doesn't matter to me. That just seems so beautiful, but yet such a fantasy.
Oh, gosh, I know, because I try and think that way. I try and look at things that way. Well, I really don't want to be influenced by skin color. One thing I think people forget, and we're not there yet, and that's not real. That's not real. And I've been reminded of this more. For some reason, in the last 4 years, there's been a lot more reminders of this. I don't know what it was. And then
that was a good one.
Oh, man. But then we do have to remember that it's been, actually, some Native Americans say 1 million years, but it's been at least hundreds of thousands of years that we have thought this way. This isn't a new thought. This didn't come around in 1890 that, these people were different. And that this was as soon as tribes got to be like over a couple hundred people, we started thinking, well, that tribe isn't the same as us. Even though they probably looked exactly the same, they might have wore a different fur fashion or something. And they were so it's a hard thing. I think it's a really difficult thing to teach out of ourselves, to overcome and realize that, yes, we're all part of the same thing. And we're all part of the earth. It's hard to get that. It's hard.
I think it's much easier just to acknowledge the fact that, we are different. Like,
yeah, well, that's true. Yeah.
And it's okay. It's okay to be different, and it's also like your preconceived confirmation bias or your bias that's inside of you, embrace it. The more that you resist that part of yourself, the more that you succumb to it. And for me, right, I've known that I have racial tendencies in my life. If there's a group of white guys over here and a group of brown guys over here, I'm going to naturally go over to the group of brown guys. I'm going to start talking to them.
Yeah, me too.
That's just the way it is. Like
I'm the same, and I'm a white guy.
If there's one African guy in a whole place, I'm going to go over and start talking to him about music. I'm going to start these are just principles, it's and they're bias, they're tendencies inside of us. Of comfort. Right. And it's okay to embrace that. In fact, the more you embrace it, the more that you can learn, hey, guess what? It might be okay for you to go sit at the Christian businessman's breakfast and feel what it's like to be around a bunch of, evangelicals and to listen to their language and listen to what they're talking about. And maybe, you can navigate your own confirmation bias. Maybe it would be nice for you to go sit around a bunch of good old boys, waving their Dixie flags. Who knows? I want to be able to be fluid enough to listen to everybody's conversation and to feel like, okay, it's okay. It's okay to be in this space because we're going to learn from each other and we're going to help mend the hoop. Robert Whitemountain, this Lakota man, he said, the real issue with humanity is that we have forgot the hoop. We forgot the circle. And getting back to the circle is getting back to the idea that, guess what? You can show up however. You can show up however. And if you sit down and you start sharing and you just listen, in this circle of life, you're going to have a transformation. You're going to change. And yet we've forgot how to do that. We've got so far away from like this idea of, hey, let's just get down to being a child again. Let's just get down to being, a grandchild again. And once we get there, right, once we let go of the distortion of the masculine and even, the over-sympathetic distortion of the feminine, we get to the equality of the feminine, masculine, and the child. This is really the Holy Trinity in my understanding. Mother Earth, Father Sky, sacred child. When I get to that place and I show up in the totality of my experience, then other people want to show up in that way. And then next thing you know, we're sitting around playing in 5, we're playing in 7, we're playing in 9, we're playing in 3 together. And we're really exploring the world of, and for those, people out there that aren't drummers, I'm talking about playing in different meters, in other words, what I'm saying is we're exploring the fun things of life together, and that's something beautiful to dream. That's something beautiful to give inspiration to and to hold that sacred space of activation. Yeah, and maybe from there, right, we can start dreaming even bigger dreams. If we can get along with each other, maybe we might start thinking about what would it be like if we had gardens on the outside of the bank buildings? What would it be like if we started growing vertical food? Could we take the San Joaquin Valley and turn it back into the wildlands? What would it be like if we, started thinking about the way that we look at food, and all the food we throw because it's blemished? What would life be like if we could start, distributing food to the hungry, distributing, food to those that are suffering? It's not that we don't have enough. It's that we have a distribution issue here. That's the one thing.
Absolutely. We have a distribution issue and we have a language issue where we label things. We put labels on things so that you can't do those kind of things. A big part of not giving food to the hungry is how that's being labeled these days. And it's absolutely nuts. It seems, I love the idea of being able to talk to different people. I'm not always the best at it, but kids are. Little kids don't know the difference. That finding the child in you is such a great concept because little kids will talk to little kids no matter who they are. And the smaller you get in America, it seems like the smaller the town you get to, the more people are just going to talk. They're not too concerned with, who you are, where you came from. They're probably going to talk to you. They're probably going to treat you like they treat everyone else. That's most of America. It really a lot of things, a lot of the supposed division in this country, I think, is a bit overblown. Some of it's not overblown, unfortunately, but some of it is. Some of it is not the reality. Like people can still talk to each other, but yeah, the
social media has given us like so many opportunities to divide ourselves. I mean, we live in a cancel culture, right? And for me, the idea of integration and the idea of connection is like that energetic exchange. And a lot of it is the tone of the voice. A lot of it is the posturing. Communication on social media through typing on a keyboard is probably one of the most challenging forms of communication to navigate. So you put that level of communication inside of a political arena, and then you have major divide. Right. And that major divide leads to isolation and tribalism. And these tribes that have been created out of distortions of reality primarily, and fear, right? You put a person and you start talking about, MS-13 and all these gangs and all this stuff and all this, horrible. I mean, it's like the super predator conversation of the Reagan and Clinton era. These are the same fear tactics that have been used over and over and over again to scare people from, each other. When really, what would it be like if you went and knocked on the door of the neighbor that has the kid that's struggling in the gang, and you said, "Hey, you know what? Our neighborhood here is noticing that you might have some substance abuse issues. We want to be here for you. We want to love you. We want to try to do what we can to help." What would that world be like instead of, "Hey, I think that those people," and I'm making a sign of a phone for everybody.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Right?
Most people are listening. You're right.
We're sitting over in the corner and we're whispering, to call the police on somebody because we think that they're doing whatever, rather than having a conversation. And what happens when the police come? The police come and they're armed, and they really don't have the training to deal with people that are struggling with a lot of the issues that communities have dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
Communities are the ones that have helped people. Communities are the ones that restore people. And to put that on police is like, that's the worst thing that you could ever do. And that's why we're seeing the struggles that we're seeing in our communities, is because they're just not trained to deal with a person that has mental health issues, or to deal with a person that has, substance abuse issues. They're there to enforce laws. That's it. And
right. Well, yeah, we've been really lucky in the city that I live in. We actually have a program that's being recognized nationally for its value, because we do send out these group of people that are basically counselors on a lot of calls, and they're trying.
Are you still in Eugene?
Yeah, I'm still in Eugene.
Oh, I seen that.
Yeah.
I seen that program actually on a national forum. I think it was it might have been a podcast or an NPR show, and they're like, use this model that's been going, and it's been going on for like 30 years or something?
It started as this thing called Whitebird Clinic. It's an alcoholism clinic, and now it's a drug and alcoholism clinic, and they have a program called Cahoots, and they basically go around in little white vans with the white jackets, and they don't have white jackets, I'm kidding, but they go around and they will go to people that are struggling, that are obviously having a problem, and try to help them. And they are now, and for some number of years, they've been taking some police calls when they'll either go in addition to police or instead of, when they know pretty sure it's a mental issue. Now, we have the opposite problem as well, that we've had a lot of police trained at the police academy in Los Angeles. The police academy in Los Angeles is the worst possible place to train a small police force in a town like Eugene. It's like 170,000 people. You're training people to deal with millions of a whole different situation. I mean, I don't think their tactics are right for any town. But so we have kind of both sides. I have dealt with the police where they've been extremely good. They've chosen to give someone a ride to talk to a neighbor, actually, and instead of arresting him, where they could have easily arrested the person instead of doing that. But they knew that wouldn't do any good. So there's kind of both sides here, which is an interesting. We're really seeing this little microcosm of, here's the bad side and the good side at the same time. Here's what it could be. And I've always thought, for me, since I was a little kid, when I was little, the police in England didn't have guns. They did not carry guns. They still carry them to a very limited degree compared to America. And I always thought, well, that's amazing. Because if you shot a police officer, every cop in England was going to go after you. Every police officer in England was then going to go after you if you shot a cop. So it was just a different world. I'm not saying that, I know that can't work here, but I always thought, well, that's a pretty different way to approach a door. Now when the police approach a door, everywhere from Eugene to cities, any city bigger, and some cities, they show up and basically they're in a pseudo-military gear, full vest. They've got several clips on their belt, which is something I noticed. They don't just have a gun. And when I grew up, they had a 6-shooter, right? They literally it was like Barney Fife. And they had a nice, neat uniform and a hat. Now they show up, it's a vest. It's, several clips. It's a weird way to approach somebody, to have them come to your door with that much, it's like we're in a different, it's like we're in a war zone sometimes.
And there's nothing in between that,
Right.
There's no in between the law enforcement person with the fully automatic weapon and right, the person, the actual human being, right? There should be some kind of middle ground there, I feel. And I think that Eugene is trying to show the world that that's possible. I remember listening to the program, and they talked about the amount of money that they've saved. And the person that was on there, and I'm not going to quote them perfectly, but she was saying that she had been on calls where it normally would have gone to the police. And they asked her, well, how many times did you have to call the police because you felt threatened? And she had worked there for several years, and she said never, that she never had to call the police because she felt afraid for her life. And that just goes to show us that, hey, a little community goes a long way.
Yeah.
We start to mend the hoop. We start to, help people that are struggling. People, we've done a great, justice with the Affordable Care Act, in my opinion, because it not only is it practicing lowering healthcare, but it also looked at the evaluation of the hospital system. Now, the hospital system prior to the Affordable Care Act was not penalized if a person came back to the hospital over and over again, which put a strain on the hospital itself. So now, right, they have done the metric, and they've looked at, hey, what happens if we keep the person at home, if we give them telemedicine, if we call them, if we, some of our elders are going to the hospital because that's the only person they have touching them. That's the only person that they have physical contact with. What if we come in and knock on the door and send a person that maybe is trained in, peer support, right, to go talk to this elderly person? Or we start to integrate wellness programs in low-income HUD housing communities. And that starts to take the stress off of the hospital, and it starts to lower the price of hospitalization for everybody, because cost and demand, this is basic principle of capitalism. But yet we haven't done this with our jails. Our jails are still getting paid for the amount of people that come, not the amount of people that they keep out.
Oh, here's what's great though. This new guy from the blue side is he's already started to dismantle that.
I love it. Where's this happening?
In the U.S. I mean, he's starting to pull money from private prisons, and basically he wants to end the private prison system, which would take years. But he's already started the process of saying we're not going to build any more private prisons, and we're gonna start taking federal money away from that. I always thought that was a terrible program. I have a brother-in-law who worked in a jail in Bellingham for 30 years. And, he could see that private prisons are a terrible idea. It's a terrible idea. If you have a prison based on profit, then what are they going to want?
Well, and, it goes into the state level as well. Mm-hmm. Because in the states are funded by the feds when it comes to the prison system. They're the ones that gives them the tanks and the guns and the armor and all that. The federal system allocates that funding. So It's the same thing on the state level as it is on the privatized prison, as far as the funding sources. The only difference is now you're not answering to the public, you're answering to a board. And I was at Corporate Corrections of America. And I can tell you that from being an inmate in that place and also being a guard in that place, the guards, it's like one guard to 500 inmates or something crazy like that. I mean, it's like the amount of people that they pack into those places per guard is extremely dangerous for them. I'm talking really dangerous. I mean, they're way more outnumbered than any state system. And the food is like we would get chicken and it would have feathers on it, stuff like that. That's just like, just gross. It was probably 90% illegal entry in there, and then 5% big drug, and then 3% Native American, and 2% like mail fraud and stuff like that, because it was federal. But the immigration stuff, I was in there with this guy that was actually my cellie, and he, this was this was back in the day 9/11, so it was Bush era. And he told me, he said that the only time that he was ever in Mexico was when his parents went there to birth him. His mom went to Mexico to have him. And you know why she went to Mexico to have him? Because of the Vietnam War.
Oh,
because she thought
she thought it would go on, and he would have to go. Wow.
She thought he could be drafted.
Oh no.
So
Yikes.
years later, he gets pulled over for a DUI, and he's just like a lot of low income people. Oh, that's something it's going to cost me money. I'll take care of it next month. And then before you know it, it's like, okay, do I eat or do I take care of my immigration? Do I pay my bills or do I take care of my immigration? Now he's got a family of his own and he's just struggling to, get his kids clothes and keep them in school. Gets pulled over on a DUI, and that leads to him being sent to Mexico. Right? He goes to Mexico and he's like, I don't have anything here. I don't even really speak Spanish. Like, he barely even spoke Spanish. So he tries to cross. When he crosses, he gets a legal entry. So now he gets hit with another crime. And literally he had no release date the last I seen him.
Oh,
because,
no.
Back then they weren't giving illegal entry a release date. I don't know if they've changed that program, but.
That's so bizarre. 'Cause, I mean, not only is that a terrible story, but it also sounds very much like a Cheech and Chong movie from a. I mean, there was some movie where they got sent back to Mexico.
I remember that.
And they just didn't have their ID on them. That's it.
I want your pants. Why don't you take off your pants?
Oh, that's funny. You do remember it.
Of course. Come on.
Yeah, how can you forget that?
Who wins in an open road battle? Airwolf or Kit? I mean, like...
That's right. Oh man.
This is the generation right there. So I got it.
Oh.
Airwolf. You didn't think I was going to pull that one out, did you?
No, that's a. Oh, another life destroyed by drugs.
Yeah, really?
Yeah, Jan Michael Vincent. Yeah.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness!
That's why you didn't see him in much after that.
Wow.
Yeah, he had a real hard time. According to what I've read now, I don't know the guy, so I shouldn't say, because who knows? But that's all the stories I've heard. That's what people say.
Great show, though.
Yeah,
Great show.
Yeah. Well, I'm a helicopter buff, so it's like the only helicopter show ever.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty
I remember
amazing.
the advertisements for the 360. He was going to do the 360 in the helicopter. Never been achieved before, but Airwolf could do it. On Thursday, 7 p.m. Join us as Airwolf.
That's great. You can probably see him on YouTube now.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It would have to be a pretty boring night to go there, though. But.
Yeah. It wouldn't quite hold up. Probably wouldn't quite hold up. Oh, my God.
Oh, man.
Well, Andrew, this has been an amazing conversation. I think I should let you go now. We've actually been talking for a little bit, a few minutes.
Yeah, I don't even know what time I'm supposed to be done or anything.
No. Okay, good. Those are the best. I mean, this is the podcasts that I like, where people get lost in conversation, and I'm able to just sit back and let them talk. And you've been amazing. I really, really appreciate you coming on, because you are full of really good information and things that people I don't think understand or hear about very much at all. And I think it needs to be out there more. I hope that I can grow my podcast so people can hear these kind of stories, because this was an important story and important information. And I love that we were able to go through a lot of things, and I barely asked you a question. That's always my favorite thing. So,
well, Joel, it's like if nobody hears it, I had fun. So I can't wait to get up there in Oregon, and maybe we'll get to jam together a little bit.
That would be nice.
Yeah.
I
know most of you kid drummers aren't drum circle people, the drum circle, but maybe we can jam a little bit.
I do have a baron.
Oh, okay.
The Irish drum. A friend of mine brought one back for me from Ireland, so I can actually sit and play that.
Didn't you say you were English? How is that? How does that feel to play an Irish drum being English?
Well, I have some Irish in me too. It's interesting.
Okay.
That's an interesting thing because I was going to mention that earlier. My aunt did our ancestry, which, a lot of people like myself don't know their ancestry at all. My aunt did it before Ancestry.com. She did it herself through her own research, and she made us each, a binder like 2-3 inches thick that goes all the way back to the 1400s.
Wow.
And so I actually do know where my ancestry goes. I thought we were German. My last name's Albrecht. I thought we were German. We were German for one generation. And those Germans came mostly from Russia. And then those families came from all over, England, Ireland. I'm like a 16th Irish is what I figured out. It goes all the way back to like dukes in old countries in the 1400s. And then,
so is this the matriarchal or the patriarchal side, or is it both of them?
Patriarchal. Yeah.
Okay.
I know much less about the matriarchal side. That is pretty much English as well, but I don't have the full ancestry for that one. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know nearly as much about that. But it's interesting because my grandmother came from Germany, grandmother and grandfather. They both came to escape, I think, the First World War. They came before the First World War, basically to escape that. But they were all...
and what's really strange is if you look at Germany, right, prior to World War I, which your grandparents were living in Germany prior to World War I. So this was a whole different world.
Yes.
These were small little enclaves of groups that were very tightly knit that had their own language. I recently met a woman that she was Estonian. I think that was her name, the ethnic group that she came from, which was a small Jewish group that lived in Poland.
Oh,
and
wow.
she's the only person, like if you look it up prior to World War I, there was this group of people there. Estonia?
It's Estonia. I actually, strangely enough, knew some musicians from Estonia in a band house I lived in. They came and recorded there. So, yeah, it's Estonia.
So she had this, remnant understanding of her identity through her matriarchal side. Her grandmother came here with her mother and didn't know any English, and her grandmother's husband, her grandfather, died. This woman's 90 years old.
Wow.
And was in one of my Sacred Seven classes that I did for a retirement community. And how rad is that, to be able to sit with a person who is a part of a Jewish European community that had its own region at one point and is now no longer on the map. That is super cool.
It is.
Somebody like that knew that. And I was like, please tell me that you told your grandchildren that they're from this group. And she was like, oh yeah, they know.
Oh, that's great. That's really awesome. Yeah, I just had a guest on my show who discovered a Jewish community in Russia it's called Soviet Zion. He made a musical about it because it was such an amazing discovery to him. And it's one of the oldest Jewish communities that still exists, and it was before people came to America and stuff. So it's very interesting. That kind of stuff the history is just it's incredible. It really
is. I love to hear things about what was going on in the world and how these lines, they seem so permanent, like we think about what the United States is and what, like our ideas are so solid, they're so concrete, but that's just our perception of it. I mean, these were literally regions that in a woman's lifetime, have now dissolved. They're no longer here anymore. And there's a lot of Eastern Europe that's like that. Mm-hmm. And also the majority of the countries in Africa, a lot of Asia as well. Like these are relatively new lines that have been drawn on a map someplace to create a region, an identity that did not exist, not too long ago. Which true. Is really, it's really kind of mind, opening to,
Africa is bizarre because it's constantly changing, because they're constantly having wars. And yeah, it's really something.
Well, it really hasn't, those lines that normally kept ethnic groups away from each other were created with two ethnic groups combined. I mean, it's not just Africa, this is going on in the Middle East as well with the, what's the Peshmerga, am I saying that right? The Peshmerga, they're like another Islamic group that's in Iran, is it? Or is it? Oh, anyway, there's multiple different regions where these groups of people have tribal lineages that go back thousands of years to this specific region of the planet. And because a European or a colonial group comes in and says, okay, well, now you're all one country and you have to live in these borders, the sovereignty of that group is now totally dissolved into another idea of of regional identity. And that's where the wars come from. The idea of Africa, those natural lines that were drawn for thousands of years, go back to who knows where. The colonial empires came in, the Dutch, the French, the English, whoever, divided up Africa. And now two groups that, have not gotten along for, who knows how long, now they're living together. And we look at it and we think to ourselves, wow, this is crazy to think about, these groups killing each other, which it is. It's horrible. But yet, what's the reason for it? That's more important, right? What can we learn about the way people get along and how they, are able to separate themselves? And, it's really challenging to think of the right answer in any of this, right? We're living in a world that, is transforming itself everywhere we go. I mean, change is the only inevitability. It's the one thing that we can depend on. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Change is the only thing we know is going to happen, right? It's really bizarre. And it is. It's hard to know the answer. Probably not doing everything for profit and not killing people because they're in the wrong country is a big start. That's a big start. Having respect for everyone on the planet, that would help. And, in the country we're in, I think sometimes we're in a unique position to do that more. That we could. We're making strides that way, and let's keep going. Let's keep going that direction. Yeah, absolutely. So I should wrap this up. It's been so great having you on here. You've been listening to Were You Still Talking? This is Joel Albrecht, and my guest today, although I'm not going to do the full definition, is Andrew Ecker. He has a wonderful book out about discovering yourself and discovering who you are. He's a native drummer. This will all be in the description. And this has been really quite a lesson. I hope we can do this again. Honestly, I'm probably going to contact you and try and do this again because this was a really great conversation. Thank you so much for coming on. And as I always say, be good to each other and also be good to yourself.
Sweet, man. That was fun.